We have made it to the final pillar of adventure, and though it is the final pillar, it is most certainly not the least. For not every battle can be won with blade and spell. Oft the application of a silver tongue can be all you need to turn the tide of war, persuade a merchant to give you goods at a discount, or beg for your life when it turns out they weren't a merchant at all, rather an assassin hired to ensure your demise. Today we'll be discussing how you can talk to NPCs and other players through the character you have created. Social interactions in D&D involve the players interacting with other characters, whether it be between each other or with non-player characters, also called NPCs. The social interactions in D&D consist of two aspects: role-playing and ability checks. There it is, we're finally talking about role-playing in a role-playing game. This tends to be one of the biggest hurdles for new players getting into D&D, and if this sounds like it applies to you, try not to worry. Roleplay begins to feel more comfortable and fun as you get used to it, and it's easier if you're playing with people that you're already comfortable with. So what is roleplay? Roleplay is to act or play out the role that you've been given. In our case as players, we get to roleplay as the character we've created. We will describe the conversations our characters have and the actions that our characters take. Keep in mind that we have fleshed them out with personality quirks, personal shortcomings, and a history of their past to help inform how we think they might behave in different situations. The DM is the one who roleplays on behalf of the NPCs. The players will only need to roleplay their own character. There are two styles of roleplay that you can use to play your character: the descriptive approach and the active approach. The descriptive approach to roleplaying is about describing what your character says and does to the DM and other players. When using the descriptive approach, try to convey your character's emotions, their intent and how it can be perceived by others, and provide as much detail as you think is important. Let's set up an example with a character who adores somebody and that individual compliments them. If we're using the descriptive approach, the player might say, "My character blushes at the compliment and awkwardly scurries away. My character tries to avoid being seen by them for the rest of the evening." In this example, we get the idea that the character is embarrassed. We can also see the character's intent is to avoid the target of his affection. And this might be perceived by others as our character being a little awkward or a little strange. When the DM presents the players with a situation, try picturing your character's response in your head. Having an image in your head and describing what you see to the other players will help them to also see your character's emotions and intentions. If you are unfamiliar with how to roleplay or haven't tried it before, this would be the approach I would recommend you start with. Where the descriptive approach is meant to tell your table what your character is doing and saying, the active approach takes it a step further by showing them what your character does and says. The easiest way to describe this approach to roleplay is that it's more like acting. You adopt the role of the character, and whatever words you say are the words that your character says. This approach is more immersive, and sometimes players will change their voice and body language for their character. Let's use the previous example again. Our character has been complimented by the target of their affections, and my character says, "Oh dear, would you look at that? My shoe is untied. I'm going to go deal with that. Bye." Hopefully, you should still get the idea that he's awkward, avoidant, and embarrassed. More often than not, I find myself using a blend of the two different approaches. Going back to the example one more time, an NPC that my character has affections for has given them a compliment. Using a blend of the role-playing, I will say, "My character blushes. Oh dear, would you look at that? I have to go, bye." My character scurries away and tries to avoid that person for the rest of the evening. And then I could keep up the roleplay through subtle acting at the table, being more reserved and shy, and avoiding eye contact with the DM while they're roleplaying that NPC. That's a way you can show your intent through your body language. As with most things, these skills will improve as you practice, so don't be embarrassed if you're not good at it right away. Do whatever you're comfortable with, and explore your style of roleplaying when you're ready. You now know a little bit more about how to roleplay, but you might be wondering how it works within the context of Dungeons & Dragons. The world will be filled with many NPCs for you to interact with, Some will be your allies, your enemies, and some will offer you quests, share rumors, or plan schemes behind your back. The NPCs that players encounter will have a first impression of the characters. Their attitudes can start at friendly, indifferent, or hostile, as determined by the DM. Friendly NPCs will want to help the players. Meanwhile, hostile NPCs are more interested in getting in their way and making things inconvenient. As a social interaction happens between the player characters and an NPC, the DM bases the reactions of their NPCs on what methods their characters use or their behavior, and can cause the NPC to become more friendly or more hostile. Some NPCs might be easily swayed by flattery, modesty, or intimidation, just to name a few tactics. However, some NPCs may respond negatively to those methods. An NPC receiving flattery may not believe what is being told to them is true. An NPC hearing modesty may think that the character is a do-gooder and doesn't think highly of that behavior. Or a brave and honorable NPC may not respond well to intimidation. While interacting with an NPC, you can begin to assess their personality, to gain clues as to how to navigate a conversation with them more effectively. So, pay attention to how the DM portrays the NPC, their mood, topics of conversation, and personality. Just as players have personality traits, bonds, ideals, and flaws, NPCs will also have these aspects to them. If these traits can be discerned, they can be played on to influence the NPC in the player's favor. Social interactions in D&D can be similar to real life. If you can gift an NPC something they want, or talk about a topic that they're passionate about and show interest in it, you begin to lay the groundwork for a successful social situation and relationship. However, insulting a proud character or speaking ill of an NPC's loved one will reward you with a hostile entity, and possibly a rival. Ability checks within social interactions reflect the random luck that is consistent throughout D&D. No matter how good you are at roleplay, sometimes things can take a turn for the worse, or vice versa. Think about what skill proficiencies your character possesses, and how that defines the way your character interacts with NPCs. Charisma is the ability that will ultimately help characters in social situations. The skills of deception, persuasion, intimidation, and performance are hints at how your character might best approach social situations. That isn't to say, though, that if you have training in intimidation, you can't have a diplomatic conversation using persuasion. It just means if you went with the approach of intimidation, your odds of success are stronger, unless the NPC is strongly opposed to intimidation tactics. If a party member has a skill proficiency in a certain social skill that you don't, it might be best to let that character take the lead, depending on the situation. If you're trying to infiltrate a fancy ball, for example, and get caught, perhaps the party member who is trained in deception should be the one to try and talk the party's way out of the situation. Or if the party is negotiating with a king on the release of a prisoner, a party member trained in persuasion might be the one to do the talking. There is something to be noted about social situations in D&D. Not every player is naturally charismatic, and it's not expected that they should be in order to play a charismatic character. Anyone can play a charismatic character, provided they have built their character in that way and the luck of the D20 is on their side. Remember, only roleplay as much as you're comfortable to. If you're new to roleplay, try starting with a descriptive approach, watch how other players play their characters, and get inspired. If you're comfortable enough to jump right into the active approach, that's also fine. But for now, let's just relax and let all this roleplay knowledge set in. In the next video, we'll be talking about downtime and resting. In the meantime, remember to be kind and play dicely.